For nearly 3 decades, residents in parts of Brooklyn have had the same congressman. His name is Ed Towns. My next guest says that it's time for some new ideas, new energy, new representation in that seat. And today he has edged one step closer to launching a primary challenge against the 15-term House member. You probably recognize him. He's Assemblyman Hakeem Jeffries. He's in the studio today. Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so explain to us, you're not declared, but you're like, you have your foot in the water, right?
Well, you know, over the last several months, I had opened up a Congressional Exploratory Committee to test the waters as it relates to the viability to move forward with a congressional campaign in Brooklyn next year.
Right.
The support so far has been tremendous, and so we've recently transitioned from an exploratory committee to establishing a candidate committee that would permit me to run next year.
And you're actually actively raising money, because even if you're at the end, for some reason, you decide not to do this, you want to be prepared in case you do decide to do it.
Well, absolutely. You know, a congressional seat is a precious thing in democracy, and unfortunately it does cost substantial amounts of money in terms of being able to adequately communicate your message. We've gotten some significant support so far. Tomorrow, I'll report having raised $173,750 to date. A long way from where we'll ultimately need to be, but certainly a significant start 1 year away from the election.
Now, just to tell folks upstate who may not be aware, Ed Towns, as I mentioned, has been there a long, long time. He's like an institution. He's had some setbacks lately. There have been a number, and we won't get into it because locally it's a little bit inside baseball, but he's had some internal party squabbles that he's lost, district leader positions, et cetera, right? He's backing the wrong horse, essentially. He is also, his son, Darrell Towns, is now a member of the Cuomo administration. These guys are a dynasty. They've had support in the past from, like, the Clintons. I mean, this guy is pretty powerful. Do you think he's beatable? Well,
this is a serious political family, and I'm very good friends with former Assemblyman Darrell Towns and have great respect for him, and have great respect for his father's service over the past 3 decades.
He's pushing 80, right? He's got to be.
He's 77 years old.
There we go. Yeah.
And so, but there's significant challenges in the community right now. People are suffering. The economy is bad. Congress is incredibly dysfunctional. Nothing is happening while people are suffering. And I think one of the ways in which we can change the situation is to begin to change the individuals that we send to Washington to represent us in the nation's capital.
So you're ready to actually run against him. He's been speculated to be preparing for retirement, although it doesn't look as if he's going to do that. Assuming that he does, there's going to be a battle. An open seat is a whole different baseball, right? You've got a guy named Charles Barron, who I think that probably viewers recognize. He ran for governor in 2010, long shot, wanted to establish like an African-American only party, right? If I'm not mistaken. He says he might run again. He did run once before.
Well, Councilman Barron, I think, would be a likely candidate. There may be other candidates. An open congressional seat, were it to play out that way, would certainly be an intense fight in the district, particularly because most people understand the importance of representation in Washington, D.C. at this moment. And that's one of the reasons why I'm seriously thinking about it. The heart and soul of our country right now is under attack by the radical right. The American dream is being threatened, and now is the time for a progressive movement to push back on what is taking place in Washington, to say we've got to stand up for working families and for the middle class and for the American worker.
So you actually said today, you're quoted in the Times as saying that you wouldn't play footsie with the Republicans, that you would be running from the left, right? Are you not suggesting that Ed Towns is playing footsie with the Republicans, or are you?
Well, he's had a pretty close relationship with Republicans over the years. That's a different style and a different approach. Now, here in Albany, then I would take. Here in Albany, when it's been necessary to partner with Republicans, I'm carrying a high-profile piece of legislation with Senator Grisanti that relates to reform in the criminal justice system as it relates to the marijuana arrest policy. I'm certainly open to working when necessary and when there's common ground with reasonable members of all political parties. But what we see in Washington right now are individuals in the Tea Party and in the radical right who are inherently unreasonable, and who hypocrisy is not a constraint to their own behavior.
To say, okay, I understand that, but the problem is, just to turn that a little bit around, is that people who are entrenched in any particular ideology, be it on the left or on the right, and say, I'm digging in and I'm not going to support any changes to Social Security and Medicare, which is enormously unpopular on the left, obviously. I'm not going to support any budget cuts, and I'd rather have a government shutdown than and go to having cutting programs, that some of which might actually help your constituents, low-income constituents particularly, I know of concern. I mean, isn't that also equally problematic if you're on the left and you're a zealot, ideologically speaking? Well,
certainly. I mean, I think that when people have entrenched positions on either side, that's problematic. What we've seen play out in Washington, particularly in the debt ceiling debate, was President Obama was willing to compromise. He was willing to put entitlement reform on the table. But you had Republicans who were of the view that failing to raise the debt ceiling would not be problematic, even though there were economists on the left and the right who agreed that it would be catastrophic economically. And then hypocrisy for them was not a constraint. Ronald Reagan raised the debt ceiling 18 times during his 8 years of his presidency. Yet he's a conservative icon at the moment. But President Obama is irresponsible because he has to do it even though he inherited 2 wars and a bad economy. And so I think that common ground is important, but you also have to recognize that it's difficult to reason with individuals who are inherently unreasonable.
You know, you would be leaving, you're a pretty prominent guy, even considering, I mean, we've had you on in the connection with redistricting. You don't believe this district is going to change significantly. It is one of the minority-majority districts, is that right?
That's right.
Okay, so there are federal rules regarding these districts because of the Voting Rights Act, et cetera, so it's probably not going to change significantly. But we have had you on because you were in the movie Gerrymandering. You were redistricted out of your own legislative district at the state level.
That's right.
So you're pretty prominent. You're a young, black, up-and-coming leader.
Well, I appreciate that coming from you.
Okay, well, there you go. No, but why would you leave Albany at a time when you actually could make an impact? Because once you get to be a freshman in the House, it takes some time to build that up.
Well, absolutely. I just think that, you know, the opportunity to possibly serve during a second-term Obama administration would be very meaningful.
Assuming he wins, right?
Assuming he wins.
Just saying.
But you can't be something with nothing. And it seems like, you know, I don't think Herman Cain or Mitt Romney or even Rick Perry, to tell you the truth. At the end of the day, when face to face against President Obama and his vision, can be successful in convincing a majority of people. So I'm reasonably confident, despite the bad economy, that President Obama will serve a second term.
Okay.
And I think that that presents significant opportunity, not because he's an African-American president, because he's an urban president. He's familiar with issues that are faced by some of the people in the communities that I hope to represent should I run.
So, but interestingly, along that same line, you've got a guy in Albany, Andrew Cuomo, who is being criticized by members of the minority community. I really shouldn't use the word minority anymore because by the numbers it's not the same. It's not anymore, but by black and Latino leaders for not having a significant urban agenda. First of all, how far has he gotten in that? You're actually here in Albany, which we appreciate, to have a meeting of the caucus because along those lines, a policy meeting getting ready. You could stay here and fight that same fight.
Well, our communities are definitely suffering, and many of us, under the leadership of Kareem Kamara, the caucus chair, and my colleagues all throughout the state, are fighting as hard as we can to make sure that as a government we have a very active urban agenda. We recently had a meeting with Governor Cuomo, and we were able to find common ground on a variety of issues. And he made some significant promises as it related to working with us to deal with the increasing gun violence in our community, trying to figure out how to deal with an increase in gang activity, making sure that women and minority-owned businesses have access to state government opportunities.
He's said those things before. I mean, he has given you guys assurances that he will be an urban agenda governor, and we haven't seen a lot of movement. We've seen some. But I mean, what's a deadline for that?
Well, I think he's going to face a significant moment when he returns to the legislature in January for his second State of the State. Because during the first State of the State, he indicated that he had set a goal of 20%, which is a bold, dramatic goal that he should be credited for. But he understands more than anyone else that now he's going to have to meet it or closely approximate the standard that he set forth. They've made significant progress in that area. We'll see in January where they actually wind up.
Interesting.
We're also hopeful that on the housing agenda that he's articulated, where he's going to bring his state housing agency to life under the leadership of Darrell Towns, that we'll see some significant steps in that direction sooner rather than later. Okay, well, obviously we'll be staying on that, and we will be monitoring your progress from afar. Assemblyman Jeffries, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for having me.